Hi, welcome to another video by Jim the Car Guy. Today we're changing the starter on a Chevy Malibu. It's an older one, it's a 1998 3.1 liter. Most of the Chevys are very similar to this, so the procedure will be just about the same thing. Fairly easy. A couple of hand tools you're going to need to disconnect the battery, obviously. Ratchet, a couple of sockets, a long extension, and then the starter pretty much falls right out of the car. So I'll take you along and I'll show you how to do it step by step. And that's it. Let's get in there and get started. Don't forget, subscribe to my channel. If you like what I'm doing, give it a big thumbs up. I'm going to get over there and I'll show you what to do. Okay. Now, obviously we're under the hood, and before we do anything with a starter, you always want to make sure that you disconnect the battery. Always disconnect the battery. Even though it looks like you may be able to sneak it through, you never want to take a chance with it. The starter is actually located down in the bottom here, but it's more accessible from the bottom, so we're going to lift it up and we're going to do this right from the bottom. Alright, don't forget to disconnect it. Use always disconnect your negative cable. It's a lot easier and less dangerous. So you take your cable off and just relocate it off to the side. Don't just leave it hanging here, because it has a chance of gravitating back over to here because of the wiring being bent that direction and touching. So make sure you relocate it with enough distance away from the battery so it doesn't actually touch by accident again. Alright, let's lift it up and let's take a look from the bottom, see what it looks like. Okay, looking at it from the bottom now, this is the bottom of the cross member right here, and that's your starter motor right there. Pretty simple job to do. What we're basically going to do is we're going to come underneath here to this cover that's actually underneath here. Get this light here. We're going to remove this cover right up underneath here. A couple of 10mm screws here, and then there'll be another screw up in the top right up here, and we're going to remove this cover so we can gain access to the starter. Then what we're going to do is we're going to remove that bolt there, and there'll be one more up underneath the bottom over here. We'll take that out, and then we're going to come back up to the side over here, and we're going to disconnect the electrical wiring, and then we're going to pull the starter out right through this opening right here. Alright, so let's grab some tools and let's get started. Alright, I hope you're able to see that. Let's get started on it and let's take it out. First thing we'll do is we'll take off that cover underneath here. Actually, there's only one screw in it because I think somebody probably left it out. Another screw at one time. Yep. Somebody left the second screw out right over here, so we have the cover off. Then we're going to remove those 15mm bolts. I always take out the one that's a little more difficult to get to than the other, just because it's the way I do it. You can take out either one, doesn't really matter. And then we're going to take out the one up in the front here. Now, as you can see, the one in the front, it is a little bit difficult. It's a little bit crooked, so you're going to need to get in there with either a swivel or a short socket. Of course, the swivel is the way to go. It's a lot easier doing it with a swivel than trying to get in there with the wrench or anything else. See if I can relocate this light so you can see a little better. Don't know if that's going to help at all. Okay. Now I can tell by looking at this that somebody's already changed this starter, because the starter has got two 5/16 nuts holding the start wire onto the car itself. Now you can get in here with a ratchet, you can get in here with a wrench, whatever works for you. I'm just going to get in here with a wrench. And we'll take those two nuts off. Don't know why they put two of them on there, but they did. You never know what you're going to find underneath here sometimes, especially when you're talking about these older vehicles. There's been a lot of so-called mechanics. I see what they did. They stripped it out. That would not account for the grinding noise too, by the way. Let me disconnect that wire. Just take it off and relocate it to the side for now. And then we're going to disconnect the other wire underneath there. It's probably a 13mm. If you can get in here with a ratchet, you can. You want to use a wrench, whatever works for you. Take that nut, get rid of it. We're not going to use that. We'll put a new one on. Disconnect your wiring. Just lift it off. And now we can take the starter right out like this. And then we'll get our replacement and we'll put it back together. Okay, when you get your new starter motor, always make sure you match it up to make sure it's the correct starter, because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten starters and they were the wrong one. So always match them up, make sure that the cone is the same size cone on here, and that the bolt patterns are the same, and that the wiring is the same also. In this case it is right, but never assume, because you know what happens when you assume. Alright? Always match it up before you put it back in the car. Alright, let's throw it back in and let's wrap this job up. Starter just goes right back in through the opening that you previously took it out of, and right back up into here where you got it from. Now, two choices. You can either put your wiring on now, or you can bolt your starter back up. I choose to bolt the starter back up first, because it won't move when I try to put my wiring on. So, get your bolt in, the one in the back first that you went straight in, because you don't want to be trying to get your front bolt in and it moving around on you. Now, do not screw it in with a ratchet. Turn the bolt in by hand. Even though you see this ratchet on there, I'm turning the extension by hand and not using the ratchet right now, because you don't want to take a chance on cross-threading that bolt. Then you're really going to have a headache. So screw it in by hand first. Just screw it up until it's snug. Doesn't have to be tight. And then before you go any further, you're going to get your other bolt in. Now, in this particular case, I can get my hand in here to get the bolt in there. And now we're just going to tighten it again by hand, which is swivel, of course. As much as you're tempted to turn it in by the ratchet or using the ratchet, don't do it. Turn it in by hand only until you have it all the way screwed up by hand, and then you can tighten it with the ratchet. Again, you don't want to strip out the block or the bolt. All right, now that it's tightened up by hand, you can bring the ratchet up and you can tighten everything up with the ratchet. And I will tighten up the other one underneath here. Nice and tight. Now we're going to come up and we're going to reattach the wiring that was previously taken off. I'm going to put the thicker wire on first. No particular reason. Make sure your wiring is into its spot where it belongs. You don't want it touching anything else and causing an electrical short. Use your flat washer, your lock washer, and use the new nut. Don't use the old one that came off. Right, you can tighten it on using a ratchet. You could use a wrench, whatever works for you. So we're just going to tighten that up. Now remember before, the previous person that put the starter in stripped these bolts out. Don't tighten it that tight that you strip out the bolts. Alright, then you're going to put your start wire back on. Install your new lock washer and the new nut. Don't use the old ones. Screw it on as far as you can by hand. And then just snug it down with your wrench. Now remember I said, don't tighten it too tight. You don't want to strip it like the previous person did. Nice and tight. That's it, you're all set. Alright, next thing we're going to do, we're going to reinstall that cover that we took off. Now as tempted as you may be to leave this cover off, don't do it, because if rocks happen to kick up inside here, if rocks kick up inside this spot over here, you're going to wind up doing damage to the bell housing and creating a whole bunch of other problems for yourself. So as tempted as you are, don't do it. Alright, we'll put your cover on and tighten that bolt up. Alright, nice and tight. Alright, that's it. So, let me just recap a couple of things there. We're going to make sure that we have the bolts tight on the starter. Both of our bolts are tight. Both of our wires are reconnected and snugged on. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to lower it down and reconnect our battery and then fire this job up and get it out the door. Alright, let's lower it down and finish the job up. Alright, now we got the car back on the ground. We're going to reattach our battery cable. Again, you're not turning it on with the ratchet. You do it by hand. You don't want to cross-thread this bolt. Nice and snug. Alright, if everything goes well, this should start up and sound pretty decent. So let's fire it up. That's it, we're all done. Alright, so to recap some of the stuff you've done here is you made sure your cable is nice and tight here. Your negative cable, of course. Everything down on the bottom is done. That's it, you're done, you're out the door. Alright, thanks for watching. Questions, comments, drop me a line. Be more than happy to talk to you about anything. As always, see you on the next one.